The time has come then to put some of all the recent theorising about using TA optimised radial light sources into practice. So we're not really going to be looking at testing it now, we're going to be looking at using it in a practical situation. This is an example scene, well, it's been taken from an example scene from a forthcoming product by Hurrow and myself, which incorporates photo captured textures in a photo captured HDR environment. The example scene mostly features this material, but these other materials are also present. The difference between these two materials is pretty obvious. This is quite a reflective material, and you can see reflections of the, well, I've used a low resolution background just for speed, of the HDRI backdrop provided with the set, and this one's a matte material, or its settings are matte at the moment. And the lighting environment as things stand, well, if I give it a render you'll see that it's very efficient, favour the reflective material. As basic lighting, I think that the intensity is set down to default level, so that 10% of the light is able to travel through the model, which means you get a little bit of lighting in this, but it's not really evident in this scene as you see it. What I want to do is I want to change the lighting environment in such a way that I can use true ambience, in fact true ambience boost light, to retain a good grasp on the colour situation. So the evident problem we're going to run into is noise, so we'll go through the steps and see how we can go about doing it. So if we first of all go into the Skylab, I'm going to set the intensity up to 100 as a matter of course, though considering the lighting method I'm going to use, it's not going to be really necessary. In here I'm not sure what effect to use, so I'm going to set this at 200, bearing in mind we're going to have true ambience optimization set, or the other thing I want to do is disable the sun at this point. Now part of the effect on the materials is generated through the specular channel, so I'll be wanting to put that back in at a later stage, but the first thing to do is get the lighting situation sorted. Now as I've swapped things over now, render time will be a little bit slower, you can see the colour from the background is strongly tinted towards the blue end of the spectrum. So the saturation of the colour is probably a bit high, but I want to leave it there because I want to bring some of the colour through. That's important for my tests. So I'll go into the render options now, select premium effects, true ambience. I'll set the rays per pixel down to speed up our previewing. I'll disable boost light for now and just use TA scattering correction. Maximum ray depth's already set at 4, so I'll leave it there. And then just having made those settings, we'll look at the situation. Okay, I've let that have a little bit of a render, and there's a couple of things you should notice. First of all, it's a bit noisy, but then again we're only using low rays per pixel, and the other thing is that we've lost the colour from the HDRI backdrop. That's sort of been reduced significantly. To recover the colour then, we'll switch boost light on and have a look how that looks. Right, well, we've got the colour back, but there's also a bit of a problem in that we've introduced a lot of these bright spots that seems to be a component of boost light and colour. Well, I said that in the last video, but I didn't really test it, so we'll knock the saturation down to 0 and see if that helps with the noise. Well, it's taken the colour out of the noise, but it's still got all these bright spots, so maybe that theory's not as good as I thought it was. It seemed to work with the coloured light sources, but we're not supposed to be theorising on this. We're supposed to be getting to a stage where we can render this scene using the high dynamic range image as a backdrop, so we can see its reflections. But we want the scene to still be lit, and we also want the colours from the backdrop. We can see a bit of the red here from the backdrop, but it's getting completely drowned out now by all this noise, whereas before we couldn't see that. It was monochrome because we hadn't got boost light enabled, so we were kind of stuck here. For boost light we get the colour, but we get the noise. So is there a way in which we can get the reflections, the backdrop, and also get this colour? Well, I wouldn't have posed that question if there wasn't, so we'll look at that next. The best and easiest way that I can think of doing this is going to have to take advantage of one of our products. You can find it at Bryce Tutorials, Bryce Downloads. Come on, Bryce Downloads. And if you look at the It's in here somewhere. It might be at this end. Oh, the spherical mapper. This is a very handy little tool that allows us to convert an entire Bryce scene into a spherical map. So I've got that saved in the object library so I can do this, and the scene I'm going to convert is just the HDRI backdrop, and then I'm going to use that as a gel on the light source, a TA optimized light source gel, which is what I was covering in the other videos. So to set this up, sky options, atmosphere off, set to fully black, go into the Skylab, image based lighting, sky, open. I'll find my HDRI. In fact, I can convert the high resolution one here. It doesn't really matter. It'll just mean a bit of loading time, but I want to show you the high resolution time. I'm not using it as a light source, so I don't need any of these options. I'm going to tone map it. This will make the colours more naturally balanced. There'll be less contrast in it. I'm going to set it to be a little bit brighter than its default setting here, because we are using it as a light source, so it'll be nice and bright. I'm going to add it to the sky. I'm going to check out of here. I'm going to get rid of the infinite plane in the scene, and from the library I'm going to grab my spherical mapper. I'm going to alter the attributes of the spherical mapper so it's set at the origin of the scene. That's so I can get my camera and make sure that the origin of the spherical mapper and the origin of the camera are coincident. I then go into the render options, set for 360 degree, and the lens system will only work if I've given it the correct aspect ratio, which is a 2:1 aspect ratio. There, I've almost remembered everything, but I always have to forget something. So I'm rendering this now. It won't take very long because, as I say, it's only dealing with the backdrop, so it's just purely doing the mapping conversion to give me an appropriate mapping mode that I can then use on my gels. So I'll save as I'll put SM for spherical mapper. You can see I've done that before because I was testing this. So once that's saved, and it'll probably take a little while, we'll go back in here, and what I'm going to do for the time being, I was going to turn the atmosphere off, set the sky to black, go into the IBL tab. I've got add to sky because I was forgetting that also, even if the sun is a visible object in the sky, it will still influence the appearance of the scene. So just by turning the atmosphere off, I've got rid of that. So now things are in a very sort of controlled situation. I can disable add to sky. So the backdrop now, hang on a minute, I need to, no, I know what I meant to do. I'm getting confused here. I need to disable it as a backdrop. I will need it adding to sky. It's still add to sky. Okay, right, I just needed to disable it as a backdrop. That's better. So now, how have I managed that? I'm sure I disabled it as a backdrop. Oh, I'm still getting a light source. Right. That's it. Get to a situation, this is the key to setting lighting up, where we've got no further influences. We're getting a fully black scene. That's good. That's where I want to be. So now I create one of these radial light sources. I'll edit it. I'm going to use true ambience optimization, use gel, go into the procedural, and I use the ambient color here to drive the effect, set the transparency up, go into the pictures, and I'll load in my spherical map here. That's going to drive my effect, and it'll also provide colours, and I must remember to set it to spherical mapping since I've gone to the trouble of spherically mapping it. And the final thing is to use include background, so that means it excludes everything, so it'll only be producing the sort of light I want. I'll set this over my scene, and if I make it large enough so it's not interfering with things, we can see it's not producing any light. It's driven by ambient, so we'll try that now. No, it's still not producing any light. So I must have forgotten one important step. Yes, I need to set it to normal. Right. Yes, I should have remembered to see it in the preview there. Now, hopefully, we'll get some light. We get some light, but not very much light. So I can, because if I look in here at the procedural, the transparent colour is set to fully white, and that's an important thing, this gel aspect of it. I can layer this up with itself. Just make sure I change the size, because remember it's a surface that's a light source, so if the two surfaces coincide then they'll interfere, and I can increase the light output. I'll do this again and just make sure I change the size of the light source. There you go. And now you can see we've got quite a strong influence from the colour from the backdrop. So remember, previously with the boost light we were still getting some red on this side, but there was so much noise it was interfering with the effect. Now we're just getting quite an even lighting, and we're still getting the colour, which was the most important aspect of this. Now I can consider putting the backdrop back in, and at this point use backdrop, and as you know it's added to sky, and I was going to go for the intensity of 20. So now I've got backdrop to drive the reflection component. Okay, we'll put the backdrop in. We're not producing any HDRI effect from the backdrop, but because the transience method is seeing the backdrop and it's high dynamic range and coloured, we're back in trouble with the noise. However, we can use this gel light source method again to save us from this. So if Control C, Control V, and create another light source that's outside everything. I'll make it a bit bigger to make it obvious. I'm going to change the family so we can see that it's different. Edit it, go into the procedural. Ambient colour is not relevant, so I'll turn the ambience down. It can be black, it can be anything. What we're using this for is to cut off the light arriving. So if I just cut the transparency down to 0, it's a fully black shell, and this is very handy because as a light source it's invisible to the camera, but as far as the transience effect is concerned the light stops there. So we've got our controlled lighting environment inside and the reflections arriving in, because it can travel through the surface of the light source, but no light can travel through. So we've stopped the true ambience lighting but allowed the reflections to come in, so we still get our reflection effect. At this point now consider upgrading the light effect from the sun, so I can get the specular, but I don't need the diffuse side because I've provided the diffuse light. So I'll enable the sun but only provide a specular. This will give me a specular highlights on the material. You can see that it's quite a time consuming rendering because I've got reflections and true ambience in the same scene, and this is obviously quite a time consuming thing because of the probes hitting the reflections, and then it's causing a lot more light gathering to go on because the reflective surface is also diffuse. But the quality of light is what's concerning me here, not necessarily the render time. I could always leave it to render out and go and do something else. So this is looking promising. One thing I might do, considering that as I said I was using the lower resolution backdrop, is now I'm getting to the point where I want to do the render. I'll go in and I'll load in the high resolution backdrop, which will take a little while. Now you notice it disabled the sun there, so I have to re-enable the sun and just check settings. I think we lost add to sky as well. Add to sky back in, and now I'll just do a quick render to see that everything's remained about right. And at this point what I'll do is I'll set the render option to the highest quality and have a look at what kind of render time we're looking at for this. It may not be necessary to use the absolute highest raise per pixel, but it will give the least noise. So if we're looking for a very high quality finish, then this is the price you have to pay. So you can see, well, that's going to take 1 hour 8 minutes, which is it's not too bad really. Other things I might consider doing, since I'm already using a premium effect, is adding a depth of field effect, but in this case it's not really necessary because I've got a high resolution backdrop so the reflections can remain sharp. So what I'll do now is I'll pause the video and then you can see the results of this render, and then we'll have a look as to see whether we've actually managed to suppress the noise here and utilize the backdrop in a way that we wanted to. So we've been able to fully control our lighting environment, which obviously is the key. I've been watching this render and it's looking promising. I noticed that there appears to be shadows here, and this is caused by the specular response of this material, because if we have a look at this material, while we're at it, because you may have thought it was a direct light source, but let's go into the material and have a look. The specular halo is quite large, and we've got anisotropy, which tends to spread the specular response, even though we're not generating any direct lighting. But I was looking at this and thinking it probably would benefit from a bit of direct lighting, but if I was to move it round to one side, I'll just switch back into a lower resolution, lower rays per pixel, just so we can preview it, then it just add a bit more contrast and interest to the scene, and by moving it round, we're really picking the specularity response up from this material here. So I thought that could be interesting. And as I said, I'd quite like to add a depth of field effect in, and well, I thought while I was thinking about it, I might as well do it. So I'll add a depth of field effect in as well, and this will blur the background a bit, but that it'll help focus on the objects that are the feature of this scene. So now we've got a direct lighting and indirect lighting. We're still getting the benefit of the colours, and we shouldn't get any more noise, because the direct light doesn't tend to produce a lot of noise in that respect. It's only when we're using TA optimized light sources with the boost light and the colours in them that we get that problem. But as I say, I've discovered a way of overcoming that problem, so hopefully if a bit more people adopt this rendering approach, then they'll be able to have more high quality renders. So that's the aim of giving out all this information, is that it should get used. So I'll try this now. I've just taken that down a bit so it's not too extreme. I'll reset it back up to 256 rays per pixel, which means it's going to take a while. I imagine adding the direct light might increase the render time slightly, but I can just pause the video and let it render out and show you the results. So you can see it's taking some time, but I don't have to sit and watch it, and if I do, I'll only be tempted to make more changes. About an hour 13 according to that. So, oops, I've stopped it there. Probably better save it anyway. Always make regular saves. That's my advice. Right, I shall pause this video here and let this render out when it's finished saving. If you use a higher resolution HDRI backdrop, it does tend to take a while to save, because the backdrops are quite large. Obviously there's a lot of data stored in them, with them having the full dynamic range. So I'll just pause this now. Using the TA optimized light source with the gel component, it's been possible to isolate then one incompatible lighting method from another. So we have the advantages of the HDRI backdrop in the form of these reflective areas and the high dynamic range nature of the backdrop, which you can see is extreme in this case. If you look along this edge, there's very fine pixelation, and here, because even though the sampling would normally result in anti-aliasing, it's encountered a very bright area. So this pixelation is all that's left of the high degree of noise you would normally get when using this true ambience optimized boost light render method with HDRI imagery. And that is the price you pay. I can't think of any way of overcoming that other than by enlarging the image and then subsampling it down again, because you've got such a high contrast between the pixel values between here and that on the model. So that's the only downside, and that and the render time and the slight faffiness in setting it up. I mean, it's not entirely straightforward, but otherwise what we have is very good shadow modeling. We have light and colour transfer from the gels provided, good bump response. I mean, all these things are good, and the reflection and the materials and the specularity. So I mean, I know this is not the most interesting scene to look at, but it was designed to demonstrate the sort of as a test to the practicalities of setting this up. And I think just looking at it will tell you that it works. So by using the gel, isolate one incompatible light source from another, control the lighting environment within the areas where you want it, and if you think this through and prepare your scene and test as I have done, which I know seems a little bit fiddly because I continually have to make changes, but bit by bit you can get to the point where you have the exact lighting environment that you want for your scene. So then it's up to you really to consider what scene you want to do, and then you can create the environment. And thinking about it, one change I could have made here quite easily would be to put soft shadows on the sunlight, and because we're already rendering in a premium effect mode anyway, that probably wouldn't have added a lot to the render time. I can test this, but I won't bother doing another render. But if I go into render options, set soft shadows, right, the initial prediction was about 1 hour 13 I think, so if I go into the Skylab here, enable soft shadows for the sun, just turn it on any old value, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to render this. I'm just curious as what impact turning this additional effect on is going to have onto the render time, because I maintain if you're already using premium effects and it's already doing the multiple samples, then you may as well just keep adding effects, because it won't make that much difference. There you go, 1 hour 17 minutes, so another 4 minutes in its estimation there to provide another premium effect, whereas if you're doing a regular render and you applied soft shadows to the sun, you would see a significant rise in render time because of the additional sampling it has to do. So if you've already gone to the extent of getting that sampling rate anyway, you may as well use whatever premium effects you want to use, because it's not going to make that much difference. By controlling the light sources in the way I've described in this video, then you're able to combine different complex effects together without the downside, and that's what I'd like you to take away from this.